Welcome everyone to Green Seminary Initiative's webinar on energy conservation for seminaries. We're really delighted to have all of you with us. Today's presentations will be done by Colby May, who's a part of the LIT organization and one of the co-founders of that, and John Everett, who's the director of physical plant at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Colby is going to go first, and then John will follow, and then we'll have time for questions and answers and larger discussion. So Colby May, it's all you.
Hey guys, worked with actually everybody here on the screen, and I don't know who's listening, but just as a reminder, I'm a certified energy manager and have been since 2001. And again, energy management, basically we manage energy. And I did that in large part with the State Energy Conservation Office. And John, I don't know if you've heard of SECO before, but it's probably a few blocks from where you are at Austin Theological Seminary. But they contracted our firm at the time in order to perform ASHRAE Level 2 energy audits all across the state. And I'm going somewhere with this. And in Texas, we have 1,100 independent school districts. And Janine, can you hear me? Can everybody else hear me? Thumbs up. Ron, can you hear me? I can't hear John. Okay. All right, Ron. Do you want me to keep going? You want me to wait till Janine? Okay. So, Texas, we have 1,100 independent school districts, and many of them, like Houston ISD, for example, have 330 campuses. So we went to many of these school districts and performed over 5,000 energy studies at a lot of these churches. Because, according to Texas, according to the EPA Environmental Protection Agency, 30% of the energy we use is wasted, which means if we lived in a perfect world, we could recapture this energy through no-cost behavior change. So saying that, the first place to start is really an energy study. So SECO had this Exxon overcharge money back in the late 80s, early 90s, and as a response created this energy or Lone Star program where we would go out and perform all these energy audits. So that's where that big number comes from. That's where the kind of the background comes from. In 2012, had a call to go back to seminary kind of later in life, and went to Gordon Conwell. I'm sure some of you guys, I know many of you have heard from about Gordon Conwell up in the Boston area, and wrote my thesis in Congo. I won't go into all of that, but it was at the back ends of the Rwandan genocide, or it's called the Kivu conflict, became really passionate about the local church in response to injustice and vulnerability and development, and really saw the tie between energy poverty, environment, and the intersectionality of just missions in the local church. So everything we do now, we do through the local church. As a result, after seminary, started a firm called LIT, and we really use energy management and energy efficiency as a means to empower the local church. And I'll get into all of that from a basic overview here in a few minutes. And when I start, if I start going over time, just give me the secret signal. But, some of the facts, just from I work with a lot of Southern Baptists, a lot of conservatives, always talk numbers. But obviously you have an equal impact on CO2, absolutely. But, according to the State of the Plate in 2013, we spent $50 billion, we tithed $50 billion to the church, 370,000 churches, houses of worship in the United States. We tithe $50 billion. Now, our second biggest budget item is utilities and maintenance of our buildings. So we spend 20%, our second biggest budget item, on utilities and maintenance of our buildings. But we spend $1 billion on missions or cross-cultural missions. So the whole aspect is, what if we lived in a perfect world, we could redirect just through good stewardship, Genesis 1 principles, where God calls us to be good stewards of his creation. But what if we could, changing the way we behave, redirect 10 to 20% of our energy savings and go to the bottom line of our respective ministries? What could that do to missions and so on and so forth? So that's the intersectionality broad view that we work on. And again, we do ASHRAE level to audits as the main avenue to redirect that spend. So it's the whole idea that if you want to build a house, you need to have some kind of blueprint in order, right? If you want to save energy, you need to have another blueprint because what we see, the average facility manager wears 2 or 3 different hats. 10 different hats, as John and Ron probably know. But so as a result, you're in reactive mode. So we want to come alongside and work along people that can be more of a proactive mode. We did it with John and Janine at their respective seminaries, but we basically want to do a blueprint for energy. Here's how you use energy, from controls to HVAC to lighting, right? And here's how you can save that in XYZ. So basically, at the end of the day, you get a blueprint for a 40-page energy audit that kind of walks you through step by step different avenues of how to impact the bottom line through energy savings. So we analyze that in a number of ways. The first is your control. So 50% of the energy we use is typically, on average, our HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Now that can be different based on where you live. And obviously, we use a lot more cooling in Austin than Janine does and Ron do in Indiana. But and then vice versa with heating. But typically, on average, 50% plus or minus of the energy we use electric is on HVAC. 90%, 95% of the gas we use, or oil based on what we have, is on HVAC. So it really means we need to pay attention to how we use and how we control our HVAC. For example, just a couple stats. Every degree you impact, like if I go up from 72 to 73 on my set points on my control, I save up to 1.5% on the HVAC portion of my utility bill. And the whole idea too is how do you control, how do things come on? Like I was working with a large church in Virginia, and they had 3 offices, and I'm just giving you just an example, but they have 3 offices in the children's wing. They only operate the children's wing Monday and Wednesday, right? But they have to have a 300-ton chiller just to condition that children's wing when they only use it partly on Sunday and partly on Wednesday. But since they have 3 offices in there, they have to turn on the entire 300-ton chiller just to condition those 3 offices. We did the math, and it cost them $60,000 a year just to condition those 3 offices. Some of the things we recommended is, 1, you can relocate your offices to the administration portion and keep that chiller off, or in an unoccupied mode as much as possible. Or you can install what we call a variable refrigerant system, VRF, that would cost them $6,000 a year. So obviously they install something like that, you're gonna have a 2-month payback. And I'm just giving you an example, right? The average facility manager might be so busy doing XYZ, they just don't have time to think outside the box. Again, going back to Genesis 1, God calls us to be good stewards, means good managers. That's not just, it's harder, it's easily said than done. We just kind of have to think outside the box. So that's the whole idea, is we're using principles like this to help empower facility management teams at seminaries, churches, etc., so that, right, they can be better stewards of this creation, right? I can go and I can install a solar, a photovoltaic or a solar system at my church and decrease my energy footprint, but XYZ. But what if I first conserve the energy I have on hand and reduce my footprint by 15 to 20%, and then install a photovoltaic system? Actually, it's less upfront cost because I don't need as much energy demand. And just you're thinking outside the box. There's a couple other things like lighting. If you're out of your classroom longer than 23 seconds, it pays to turn off your lights. Plug load, things you plug into the wall, that's usually about 20% of our energy use. Up to 75% of plug load is what you call phantom load. So even when the device is off, it's using energy and drawing energy. So there's these things, from HVAC to lighting to plug load that we want to focus on. The biggest factor on every single thing you have in your facility is behavior. How do you operate your HVAC? How do you turn on your lights? how do you operate plug load, down to the utility bills and benchmarking. Benchmarking is when you take 12 consecutive months of your utility bills and you analyze it. They compare it to a gas gauge in a car. When you see what you have in the tank, you make better informed decisions. So I'm kind of rambling here, but I want to kind of give you a more of a generic bird's eye view of why we do what we do and some of the things that we find and the overall benefit and impact of what we do. So we were able to do some good things with John. I think you might talk about that shortly. And we were able to, in my opinion, find some good things with Janine and Ron. But that's my spiel here in a few minutes. Any questions or anything else you want me to talk about specifically?
So John's at Austin, and Janine and Ron are at AMBTS, correct?
Anabaptist Seminary, yeah.
And with Green Seminary Initiative, you've done about 12 energy audits. And you've talked a little bit about the broad strokes, right? I have the opportunity to edit and go through and all of those audits, right? And what I have seen you kind of talk about for each of those seminaries is often around behavior and the things that you've mentioned, but also talking about just tightening up the building envelope, and thinking about how we purchase things to make things more efficient, right? Can you think about a good example of a seminary that's